Hey guys, congratulations if you found this video, because this is the unlisted, nerdy, geeky part where we kind of go behind the scenes and provide you with some verification of what we've been doing. And what we have been doing is building a pretty exact calculator, where you can put in your ride characteristics. You're not limited to one type of ride. You can put in your ride length, you can put in your watts per kilo, you can put in the grade, for example, and that will give you a heads up on your baseline speed, and then with reference to your change, i.e. compared to baseline, what happens when you put an OSPW on there. Now we know there's loads and loads of OSPWs out there, so let me just say a caveat here is that we're talking about this as a package. As a package, I'm talking about the jockey wheel, I'm talking about the extended arm, and I'm talking about the bearings. So what's going to happen? Now, I know they're not all exactly the same, so I will allow you in the calculator to put in some variation on what you think is the savings in those key domains. And by the way, if you haven't seen or checked out our main video on YouTube, it's on FFT.tips/V and then OSPW, V OSPW. Okay guys, before we go any further, I realize we should do some kind of double check. Let's call it a sanity check of the OSPW gains or losses in terms of aerodynamics, because I'm putting a figure out there that could be 0.8, 1 watt, 1.2 watts. The truthful answer, the correct answer is obviously it depends. It depends on a lot of factors we'll get into in a second. Let's just say that we're talking about an area here which is relatively small. It is in dirty air, behind the cranks, behind the crank arm, and it does kind of depend on the angle of the rear pulley anyway. So there are lots of factors here. So for sure, if we had the facilities, we'd do a wind tunnel test. However, not many people have a wind tunnel test, and they're going to go with specifically ceramic speed or another OSPW versus non-OSPW. It's difficult to do. And let's be honest, if it's under 1 watt, the aerodynamic drag, if you like, it's quite possibly under the resolution that the wind tunnel will detect. These are relatively low speed wind tunnels, not like the Formula One high speed wind tunnels. So you could easily get a false negative from a wind tunnel, which I'm sure has happened before. So an alternative to the wind tunnel is like a virtual wind tunnel, and these are popping up quite a lot. So the idea here is that you go into like a green screen room, you adopt your racing position here like on a TT bike, and the software will work out your effective frontal area. From that, you can get your CD and your drag, the CDA, like live or dynamically. Now, these aren't necessarily 100% accurate because, it depends on the exact setup of the camera and the way that it converts the area into actual CD. It's quite tricky to do that accurately. This example is from VeloLogic Fit. Okay, so we've got the wind tunnel, we've got the virtual wind tunnel, but you could calculate it from first principles. It's not actually that hard. So here's a quick one we've done at FastFitnessTips. Just put the height of the rider, the weight of the rider, the speed that you'll be going, for example, 40 kilometers an hour, it converts into meters per second. You can put your drag figure in there, take that from an online source if you don't know it. That will give you your default CDA, okay? Now, this is the interesting bit. We've got the size of the OSPW, but we want the frontal area, really, of the OSPW. Now, in a small OSPW, that might be 30 millimeters. For a large OSPW, we measured it as 16 millimeters wide and 63 millimeters high, which actually gives you an area of 1,008 square millimeters. Now that's divided by 1,000, so to get that into meters squared, it's actually 0.001. So that gives us a pre-OSPW CDA of 0.40194 and an after OSPW CDA of 0.40295. The question is, what do you do with those figures? Okay, so what you do with those figures is you go into one of the number of online calculators, either this one from Analytics Cycling. So in this one, put in your pre-OSPW CDA like 0.40194 and press run model. Oh, you've got to put the speed in there, 11 meters per second in this model. So that gives you 302.2 watts and then put your revised post OSPW CDA, which you remember it was 40295 for the example we gave. Run model again, that's 302.9. So in that example, we've got a loss of 7 watts with the OSPW. Let's try this one at Cycling Power Lab. This is very similar, but it starts with kph speed there. So put in 40 there. Weight of the rider, we had 6.9. Then we had, they give you a default of 0.4 for the CDA. So we're going 0.401 or 0.40194. And then we're going 0.040295. Okay, run model or calculate power. We're interested in these second two figures, which is around about a 0.8 watt penalty. So that gives you a ballpark estimate using a mathematical model of how we get to 0.8 watts. But that 0.8 watts will vary. Obviously, it varies according to the speed. It varies according to your baseline characteristics, but you can play around using that method and find the watts gained or lost approximately for your OSPW. If you can be bothered to actually measure, remember it's the added height of the OSPW that you really want. Okay, let's return to our main spreadsheet calculation. So let's start with the 40k TT. I'll also say, yes, quality of these items varies, of course. And also some are more aerodynamic than others. For example, some have an aerodynamic cover. If you were to ask me which ones I would recommend, well, I'm not recommending any. I'm certainly not recommending the ludicrously priced ceramic speed set, but I have been impressed with the Cactus Cycles set because they come with so many variants, including somewhat of an aerodynamic cover, and you'd have to take those into account when you're talking about differences between stock and upgrade. But let's go back to the 40k TT and Brian Jones. Where are we at if we look at the 40k TT ride? And I've created a model here. It's called the FFT Real World Marginal Gains Calculator for OSPW. Well, let's just, for sake of comparison, just to start, let's do a 40k TT. Now I've provisionally put in 34 grams, 1.4 watts of drivetrain friction, and minus 0.8 aero drag losses, that should say. I'll just correct that. Okay, fine. Now what are these figures in yellow? Well, the figures in yellow are corrected or calculated gains and losses based on the ride characteristics. So let me explain. If you're going at higher power, you're going to have more frictional gains because the system's more under strain. It normalizes at 0. This was my argument to ceramic speed initially. You can't have a minimum of 2.4 watts of gains if your watts through the system is 0, because it's got to go to 0. So you've got drivetrain friction gains is adjusted, the results in yellow. The aero drag losses obviously scale with speed, that's adjusted as well. And weight gain estimate, that's in grams. Now, the correct way to do that is to plug it in to an overall calculator where it just has a tiny effect on your watts per kilo, and the watts per kilo are then determining your speed. So that's basically how this calculator works. A bit of maths behind the scenes. Watts per kilo, taking into account grade and power, will determine your overall race speed. So for example then, if you did a TT, 40k TT, and you had these losses versus gains, then your cumulative effect on the 40k TT would be actually a 4-second loss in this calculation. You'd be going pretty fast at 333 watts, around about 51 minutes achieved. Okay, that's a model, but it gets you 47 kph. So your aero drag gets scaled up mathematically to 2 watts equivalent in losses. Whereas at 333 watts, yes, there is a scaling, but it's modest on your drivetrain frictional gains, 1.5. So all told, if you model it out, you get a time lost in weight of 1 second actually 1.3 of a second. You get a time gain of friction of 10 seconds. That's useful, okay, fine. But you get a time loss in aero drag of 13 seconds. So over your course, 40k TT, you get a 4-second loss. Now, if you change the parameters of the TT, like it was a really big hill climb TT, let's say, massive climb, when say 3% average, then your average speed would come down to 32. You take a lot longer on the course, your weight penalty would be 2 seconds, your drivetrain friction gains would be 19, and your aero drag would go down to around about 9 seconds. So you'd actually end up with 7-second saving on that course. So what I'm trying to do here is give you a heads up of how this calculator works. So I'm just going to skip direct to Brian's race. He already told us then he wants to race Kona. He's doing 180 kilometers, he said. He said he's around about 5 hours. He didn't say his power. So let's adjust it in the calculator. Yes, so if we model the total average height gain, it works out about 0.3% grade. Now that's not as accurate a model as modeling each sector, but let's just do a ballpark model first. So 0.3% over 180k. Okay, his power is less. So his power is around 243 watts, 183k. Let's say his weight 70 kilos. Now, what does it tell us about upgrading to OSPW? Well, what it says is that 34 grams is going to cost you 7 seconds over that course. The drivetrain frictional gains are going to save you a pretty impressive 50 seconds. But unfortunately, the aero drag loss is going to cost you 56 seconds. And that's going to lead you to have a cumulative loss, unfortunately, Brian, of 13 seconds if you upgrade to OSPW in Kona versus a pretty good system, a tight Dura Ace or a SRAM Red system with good quality bearings in there anyway. So I'm not saying versus a stock bottom of the range component. I'm saying against a good quality component. But what I am saying is going like high end to ultra high end is not going to cost you anything. In fact, it's going to give you a loss of about 13 seconds. Now, the beauty of this calculator is it's dynamic. It's not fixed, so it will work out kind of any combination of gains versus losses. So you might say to me, I don't believe your model. I think that the drivetrain frictional gains are always 2.4 watts or more, yeah? So I can say, okay, 2.4 watts, fine. What's the saving with 2.4 watts? Well, if you stick with the same aero losses, 2.4 watts of gains, 34 grams extra, then with Brian's stats, it's going to save him 22 seconds approximately over that ride, which is incredibly modest. Let's take a more powerful rider for sake of interest. Let's take a 300 watt rider, very impressive 300 watts over the whole of 180k. That will bring your 5 hour time down to about 4 hours 20, increase your average speed up to 42 kph. So with a more powerful rider, you're going faster, the aero gains may be obviously slightly more. It's going to reduce your saving to around 20 seconds. And let's say it was a flat course, it brings it down to around 10 seconds. Okay, so the gains are modest. Now, I actually think a fairer comparison would be 2.4 watts of drivetrain friction versus 1.2 watts of aero losses. And there you can see with that tiniest tweak, the whole thing flips. On a zero grade, a powerful rider is going to lose 20 seconds with an OSPW system. Let's set it back to Kona, 0.3 average. They're going to lose 8 seconds if they're 300 watts. If they were 350, they'd lose 9 seconds. If they were 250, they'd lose 5 seconds. If they were Brian, they'd lose 6 seconds. If they were a beginner, they'd lose 3 seconds. If they were a raw beginner, they'd look at that, they'd break even. So here's a headline. A raw beginner, 150 watts at Kona, on the course, bike leg alone, 6 hours 46 minutes. You could upgrade your OSPW system and it will actually save you in drivetrain friction 1 minute and 30, but it will cost you 120 in aero drag. and that 120 is added to by another 9 or 10 seconds of weight gain penalty, which ends up with exactly nothing, guys. Exactly nothing. You spent all this time talking about exactly nothing, and I feel the same way about this video. I've spent all this time and I've got to exactly nothing. Alright guys, that's my heads up on OSPW 2019 version. Remember, I'm not talking specifically about ceramic speed, I'm talking about all oversized pulley systems. Yes, they're not all identical in gains versus losses. The dynamic calculator will allow you to tweak them to put in your own figures. That is true. You can play around with it if you want. But the bottom line is what we've learned from the last few years is the OSPW systems, like many things on the bike, are a very fine balance of gains versus losses. And it's not actually super simple to say what will happen. It's not super simple because the effect is magnified by the course and rider characteristics, as you've seen in the spreadsheet. But overall, I will say, as a ballpark figure, the slower the rider and the more difficult, the more uphill the course, the more the gains in OSPW. But actually, the faster the rider and the more flatter the course, which is ironically the kind of riders that are buying into OSPW. If you look at these pros, how many have OSPW systems in Kona? You know, it's quite a few, around 50% of the top 10 or more. So I just want to bring you a heads up that, like all things in life, things are very rarely super simple. And now it's up to you whether you invest in one of these OSPW systems or not.